All right. Well, let's get started. Let's get right going. Perhaps just to start, we have many different projects and teams. We've got some of the major kind of L2s here on this panel. Do you want to first say your name and then the project that you work for, just so we give the audience a little bit of background on who's up here today?
Hi, everyone. I'm Steven. I am from Off-Chain Labs. We contribute to the Arbitrum technology stack, as well as Prism, which is the leading consensus client for Ethereum. But here today, I think, to talk about Arbitrum.
Hi, I am Eli, co-founder, CEO at Starkware, and we support the Starknet Layer 2.
Hi, my name is Arun. I work at Mantle. We are an OP stack based rollup that uses off-chain data availability using EigenLayer DA.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hai Chen from Scroll. So I'm the co-founder inside of the Scroll, and then inside the Scroll, I lead the engineering team. And the Scroll is a ZK ROP, EVM equivalent ZK ROP for ACM.
Amazing. I'm so excited to chat with you guys. Thank you for being here. Let's get started by talking about 4844, about the Denkun upgrade that is really designed for L2s. It's one of the first, in-protocol changes where Ethereum's really hammering home the vision that Ethereum wants to scale through L2s and not on the L1. One of the main kind of questions around EIP 4844 is exactly how much of a benefit is it going to be to L2s? There's a lot of back and forth with Ethereum core developers about how many blobs to introduce. They finally landed on 3 blobs per block with a maximum of 6. But I'm curious to know from you guys, like, how prepared are you for this upgrade? How important do you think, how much of an impact do you think it really is going to have on layer 2 adoption? Hai Chen, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I think 4844 is still a very important upgrade that coming to the ACM. It's very important for the layer 2 because you can save on the data availability by just using the blobs. That is can be expire after about 2 weeks. But I think people may initially being overly optimistic about how much reduction of the 4844 data blobs it can reduce. I think from the current testnet, it sees it's about the 3 to 4x reduction compared to the core data in the saving the cost, which people initially think it's maybe 10x. But I think overall it's still quite important because as layer 2, the majority cost of the layer 2 transaction is still coming for the data availability. So 80–90% of the data is contributing from the making the data available. So using the 4844 data blobs can still reduce a lot of on the layer 2 transaction cost. And then we are working on to supporting the 4844 very soon.
Gotcha. Anything to add, Arun?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. Like Hai Chen mentioned, 4844 is foundational in the sense that it paves the way for full dank sharding, at which point the on-chain Ethereum-based data availability will increase by order of magnitude. But the actual increase right now is going to be fairly mild, at least initially, while they're bootstrapping the network. Like Hai Chen mentioned, 3 to 6 data blobs, which equates to about a max about 750 kilobytes of data per block, which would equate to around 100 to 300 extra TPS across all rollups based on some reasonable assumptions about the number of bytes per transaction based on transaction complexity. And in terms of how this actually affects something like Mantle, which does off-chain DA, I would argue it opens up optionality for sure, but since in almost all cases the cost of posting data to an off-chain DA solution, like EigenDA, is going to be orders of magnitude lower than anything with on-chain call data-based data ability or data blood ability. It's unlikely we would change our methodologies that much based on it.
That's fair. Just to pick up on that. So, I mean, sure, data availability costs are going down on Ethereum through EIP 4844, but Mantle is still going to be using other data availability solutions because they are still cheaper than what's going to be available on Ethereum. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. It'll be dramatically cheaper, at least for the near term.
Gotcha. Ellie, I know Starkware was one of the first to be ready for this upgrade. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, picking up on that point of, you know, you are using Ethereum for data availability and being very, very conscientious about making sure we're ready to utilize the full benefits of 4844 as soon as it goes live. But why not also experiment and see kind of the perhaps more performant or less costly DA layers out there like Celestia and other L1s?
Oh yeah, we don't object to using them. We will be using data availability layers as well. So yeah, no objection there to that. We'll also have a volition at some point. You know, you want to really integrate things and maintain proper security and proper interface with all of the infrastructure. And the thing that our developer ecosystem wanted first to have is this, you know, the blobs of EAP 4844, because they basically get Ethereum security just turned on with no change. Once we bring in things like data availability or volition, it means that they would need to change parts of the code, like to opt into using those things, and it would be slightly more work for them. And but it really depends on what kind of cost reduction we'll see with 4844. If it's as significant as promised, then we'll be happy with that for a while.
That's the thing. I think a lot is up in the air about how much the cost reduction is going to be, especially if we see more activity on L2s. And one of the things that I want to highlight about the analysis that has gone into how EIP 4844 is going to impact L2s is from Off-Chain Labs. I believe one of your colleagues, Stephen, had written a blog post explaining that EIP 4844 will likely be more economical for the larger rollups, and for smaller rollups, they'll have to rely on secondary blob markets to basically auction off different parts of the blob because they're not going to use the full 128 kilobytes. Can you talk a little bit more about like those secondary blob markets and who those markets are going to be run by? A little bit more about like the third order consequences of EIP 4844 on L2s.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's one of the nice things internally. So as I mentioned, we build Arbitrum technology, but we also, our team was very instrumental in building the layer 1 side of this, the Prism team, in building 4844 support directly into Ethereum clients. So we sort of get to see both sides of that, and it helps us with our understanding of the ecosystem. And yeah, I think the thing that you're alluding to is this idea of if you can fill up a blob, you'll get much better economics than if you have a partial blob, and sending partial blobs will not be great. So there's this hypothesized idea that people will somehow coordinate to share and come together. I don't know exactly how that will play out and what that will look like. But what I can tell you is for the Arbitrum public chains, they are expected to be just fine and be able to fill up those blobs, so they'll be able to benefit really, particularly Arbitrum 1, which is the one that sends its data to Ethereum. They'll benefit from 4844. I haven't done the exact analysis. I know there's a lot of great people doing it. My approach is basically it's coming in a few weeks. We're gonna see what it is, and we'll you know. But Arbitrum technology will be ready. There's a DAO proposal already live, making sure that the chains are ready to adopt this as soon as it's ready, and so it will go live basically on day one. And I think it's going to be very important. One thing that I think is going to come interesting from this is I think it's going to highlight a lot of the differences in L2 fees and layer 2 fees. A lot of the today, as you know, as we mentioned, there's the L1 fees are dwarfing everything else. So no one's really paying attention to that little bit on top. So some layer 2s are charging this much, some are charging this much on top. And I think when you squash the bottom, that you zoom in and that becomes important. And there's a very important conversation on sustainability. Arbitrum is not the cheapest at layer 2, but it's sustainably priced. I think that's going to open up a very interesting conversation.
I agree. How much of the fee savings will be sent back to the end user of the L2, and to what extent is it actually you know, desirable that you make transactions on L2s like sub-cent cost, especially if that encourages more spam or makes it more unsustainable for the rollup to operate? That is a very interesting question. Any thoughts on that before I move on to one of the other questions that I had though from the other panelists on the topic of like once the fees for data availability are significantly low, to what extent do you give back all those savings to the end user versus for the sustainability of the roadmap?
Yeah, I think like for us is we initially when we designed the scroll, we have like the multi-dimensional fee structure. We have like layer 1 fees and also the execution fee that we separate. So once we're using the 44 data bus, then that automatically will translate that the layer 1 data fee will reduce a lot, and then that will be like I think saving a lot of cost directly. That user can benefit from that.
Yeah. So show of hands here. How many people have participated or had team members of your team go to something called the roll calls that have started recently in the last couple months? They're spearheaded by the Ethereum Foundation to improve the standardization and kind of interoperability between rollups. Show of hands, who's gone to these roll calls / have sent members of their team to the roll calls? Okay, first question to you then, Ellie, because this is really about
the bad boys.
Oh, I mean, part of it is really about also encouraging EVM equivalence. And so it doesn't come, I know one of the unique things about Starknet is that it's not as
Aligned.
And this meeting is all about how do we ensure that the protocols and the changes that are happening on the L1 align with the L2s and the L2s align with the L1s. Tell us a little bit about that decision to be not as aligned to Ethereum, and is that a conscious decision not to participate in the roll calls?
So we build different. We build for the long term. We build what we think is the best technology that we can provide. We invented Starks, Cairo, Starknet, Stone. By the way, let me take this opportunity to tell you, if you have time, at 4:25 at the Coral stage, we're going to have a very interesting announcement about proving technology breakthroughs. So please, if you have time, go attend it. Anyways, we wanted to, the story of Starknet is that, first of all, we built the first L2 scaling solution, which was the StarkX system. And when we started at it, everyone was saying, first, Ethereum doesn't really have a scaling problem. And two, certainly, validity technology is not going to be useful for that. Three, definitely it's not going to be Starks. Now, it ended up being that pretty much all of the leading L2s using validity rollups have converged onto Starks. And it is actually considered the end game, and we're very proud of it. Cairo and the Starknet stack are the next generation smart contract language. I think you'll see a lot of convergence on that as well. We have this tendency of saying things that at first people think that we're like crazy or don't make sense, but over time people realize they actually do make sense. So, we've been termed unaligned. I don't think we are unaligned. We just build a bit different, and we think of ourselves as trying to do the right thing with our technology. All of this to say, I still apologize for not joining the roll calls. We'll try to make sure that someone attends them because we do very much support Ethereum and we want standardization among L2s.
Of course. On the topic, though, of maintaining EVM equivalence and conforming to kind of like the standards set by the layer 1, which is, for example, like only using a certain precompile address format that this was one of the topics of the roll calls, to reserve a set of precompile addresses just for L2s to use. Is this a very important initiative that EVM equivalence and maintaining alignment with L1 in the future? Is that something that, Stephen, that you foresee kind of being like a top priority for Arbitrum?
Yeah, I think coordination like that, particularly if you are building an EVM chain. If you're not, then you don't need to worry about some of these things, but you do want to have that coordination because, if you use some precompiled address and it means something else in a different ecosystem, and then Ethereum introduces a new precompile, now it's just going to cause like chaos. So that level of coordination, I think, is important. When it comes to the general EVM equivalence or not, I think we take at Offchain Labs a very middle position, which is, and that's what we call EVM plus. We're building something called Arbitrum Stylus, which says EVM equivalence and Arbitrum isn't going anywhere. If you want to build a Solidity, it's going to have the best support, equivalent support as best as you can. But we also don't view that as like the ceiling. We view that as the floor. Like that's baseline support, which we think is important because so many developers and so much code today written in that language. But then we say, can we do more? Can we appeal to developers writing in other languages? And that's what Stylus does. So it adds support on top of the EVM for developers that want to write in Rust and C++ and allows them to do that synchronously and also get a 10x benefit. But it's not only the developer, it's also their code. So if you're a gaming studio that spent the last 5 years writing a gaming engine in C++, you can now directly call that on chain. So our approach is the EVM is very, very important because it has so much adoption in our ecosystem today. But if you zoom out, they're estimated to be about a few tens of thousands of Solidity developers, about 3 million Rust developers, about 12 million C and C++ developers. And we say, can we cater to those people too? And that to us seems like a big win. Of course, we should keep EVM equivalents and not do anything with that. So this is all extra and additional. But for those who want it, can we give them a path directly onto the Arbitrum chain so they can work together with Solidity? You can actually have a single app that's written in Solidity and Rust for those that want to opt in and use that, and we think that's important. There are some that think like this is like sacrilegious, like EVM is like you cannot deviate from it, and I respond to them and say, Ethereum itself tried to do eWASM, which was very similar a few years ago. Not only that, like I don't think anyone in the world today, if they were starting from including Vitalik, would say, let's create the EVM from a fresh slate, like if we could do the same way today. Everyone has changes you'd make. That's the way software works. You're locked into some of your decisions based on legacy requirements, but like there's nothing like religious about the EVM. There's a very important reason to keep it, and we think it's important for the adoption, but we're also happy to expand it without hurting it, and I think that's sort of the middle line approach we take.
But that's also kind of like the beauty of rollups that I think a lot of core developers want to see. They want to see the most experimental, the most flexible type of EVM. They want to see code changes that they can't get passed on the L1 because of how, you can't really move fast and break things on L1. You have to they want to push the more experimental things to L2s, but I think there's also some pushback from L2 teams of being viewed as like the testing grounds for just layer 1 changes. I mean, Arun, what do you think about the narrative that, L2s should be kind of like the test nets of Ethereum, and then, eventually the ones that the projects or like the protocol changes that really work out, then we like, do that on the L1?
I think I can argue from two sides there. The first is that if you're creating an L2 and you're creating an L2 that's fully EVM equivalent, you're going to have, at this point, I think, a much harder time getting adoption for it than if you were to try and experiment, just because this is going to be the year, I think, people are going to launch 1,000 different rollups, and if every single rollup is just an EVM equivalent rollup, what's the differentiator that gets you to like be the rollup people use? Like, maybe you could be the Kazakhstan rollup or something, or organized by nation states or ethnicity or religion, things like that. But I think a much more interesting approach would be to kind of organize based on some kind of technical advantage or change in architecture or things like that. And to that point, like there is nothing that's going to stop. Like Ethereum can't stop these rollups from doing this. Like at best they could standardize and say, okay, well make sure you don't use like any random prefix for your precompiles. Otherwise, any kind of cross rollup client that we want to implement is going to have a nightmare trying to deal with all this different stuff. So I think that is a better approach. These rollups will experiment, and then Ethereum can eventually choose to do this, to implement the things which the rollup seems to succeed at after kind of picking the winners. And I think we're seeing a level of standardization kind of occur, not just with the roll call, but also in terms of like the more structured RIPs, the roll proposals, of which the first was to implement this precompile that used to be called EIP 77212, which adds a decreased gas cost for AES verification to allow for ERC 437 wallets to have cheaper verification costs on the chain itself.
I mean, Hai Chen, anything you would add to this? Because Scroll, of all the rollups, is not to use too awful comparisons, but Scroll is probably like the most Ethereum aligned because it's trying to be like a type 0, like a ZK EVM that is completely can take the entire EVM and just be able to like replicate it fully in its exact state. This is a long-term vision for the Ethereum protocol roadmap to, one day even have that enshrined in the protocol. So I mean, I feel like I mean, what are your thoughts that L2s are kind of the testing grounds for what Ethereum will eventually want to be?
Yeah, I'm personally, I think I support like more experiments on the layer 2 so that I can try out more features. For example, and then in order to like making those experiments, for example, the new precompiles be more usable is that like all of the layer 2s, Rollups, like which are EVM compatible, adopt the same standard and same protocol so that the developer, all of the developing toolings that can be all used across different layer 2s, that would be like benefit the developers and also reduce the confusions to the developers when like you need to be very careful, like turn on certain flags for when you develop on different chains. That's like a nightmare for developers, I would say. But like when they come back to the Ethereum, like on the layer 1s, I think like I'll argue for is that layer 1 to behold this golden standard, that being like very stable, not like the moving too fast on the changes, because like otherwise, if you like the making lots of the drastic changes to the EVM itself, like pushing all of the layer 2 that are trying to be EVM compatible to be catching up on a lot of things, and then some things like for example certain precompiles, it could be, or some changes to the EVM will not be very ZK friendly. We're adding even more costs like for the ZK EVM to catch up to implement those things and adding actual overheads for that. So I would say like what Ethereum like a layer 1 should be like really thinking about is how to maybe like serve all the layer 2 rollups better, like to reduce the cost, like the 44 data blobs, and then like and then in the future for the full dank sharding. So I think I can driving this rollup centric roadmap, like then to keep growing the layer 2 space.
You know, that would be nice, but I do believe that Ethereum core developers are really gunning for some pretty major changes to the EVM. Not that it'll happen in the near future, but like Ethereum object format, account abstraction. We are definitely probably going to get BLS precompiles in the next upgrade, and it seems as though the confidence that in L2s is waning a little bit as of late. There was a tweet a couple of weeks ago by Vitalik that said he was 3 times less confident in this idea that we can just push all the complexity to L2s because L2s are not as proven as the L1. So making L1 more simplified as a DA is not something that he's as confident about doing as he was prior. Does that shock you, Ellie?
Does it what?
Does that kind of surprise you, like that sentiment, that confidence in L2s to be able to inherit the complexity and the risks of what Ethereum might otherwise not be able to do, because L2s could fail, because L2s could could have a major bug that causes a bunch of people to lose money, etc. Like, does that surprise you?
No, in fact, I think that it's inevitable that some L2s will experience catastrophic bugs and failures. And part of the reason is, we have to acknowledge that some of the L2s do not have their core security turned on. So the thing I'm most worried about is that some L2s just do not have security turned on. And it's heading towards a huge catastrophe. If not on the major L2, then some of the rollups that are going to be based on it, there will be a Mt. Gox-like event on some of these L2s that have no security turned on. And do your own research on whether your L2 has a security and where you entrust your funds. Now, having said that, the teams that are serious about security, and some of them sit here, I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that. Look, things could have bugs, Ethereum experienced bugs. Serious teams have a way to overcome bugs. And if the technology you're using does not have security turned on, you do not want to put funds on it. Do your own research.
Let's talk a little bit more about security and how we define security on rollups. I'm under the impression that many rollups don't have working fraud proofs or really validity proofs, or really have all dependent on a centralized entity to produce blocks on the L2s. These are major kind of shortcomings of most layer 2s. Does that keep you up at night, Stephen? Like the lack of security and the idea that a Mt. Gox level event could happen on Ethereum because of the lack of security?
Well, if I were building a platform that had those limitations, it would keep me up at night, and that's why explicitly, like in Arbitrum, security is always first. I agree with the things that Aldi said, and I know that we agree on a lot of those points, that security being really primary and the most important concern, and that's why we've done things the way we've done things and made sure that security proofs have been live in this ecosystem from day one. I do think, to your point about Vitalik's tweet, and to Aldi's point, every L2s is not like one thing, particularly now there's this explosion of layer 2s, and everyone has its own considerations, and it goes together. Those teams that take security seriously will also be very slow to do any upgrade that is security conscious and won't be experimenting. So you want to make sure you're in a secure environment today, and one where you have serious developers that are making sure to continue to secure that. It gets much, much harder in the world where now we're encouraging others to use this technology to build their own rollups and make their own decisions. So you have to do your research not only on the core stack, but also on those that are implementing it. And I think it's important, though, to make sure the core stack having security is the baseline important thing, and then you also have to understand who's operating it, and are you ultimately secure there. So doesn't keep me up personally for the users of Arbitrum, but as an industry, I do agree that it's and one that cares deeply about Ethereum. I think it is something that is very, very scary, and I'm personally concerned about, and hope that we can solve soon.
Gotcha. And maybe as a final question, because we now have to wrap up our panel, but for all our panelists, what is kind of like the one major objective or milestone that you'd like to see your rollup kind of achieve this year? Let's start with Scroll first.
I think like for the Scroll is so one milestone is I think the next will be bringing using the 4442 continue to reduce the reduce the cost on the Scroll, and then the second thing is we are working on to bring the more security features, as I think Steven said, we take the security first approaches. So we're trying to build a multi-prover approach that we are bringing one more SGX prover that's going to test alongside with the ZK proof, and then after that we can working on towards the decentralization. I think it will be important things for the layer 2. I think we are starting from the prover to be having it decentralized, and then moving up to the sequencer.
That's a lot to look forward to this year. Mantle, go ahead.
Probably not only this year, but I think
Yeah, I think building a rollup is hard. There's many different objectives. So I could speak myself personally. I would love to see more standardization around fork choice rule when dealing with off-chain DA. Mainly, how does a rollup decide whether data is maybe made available to the L1 and what state would you consider canonical, and kind of how this actually resolved at the L1 level, because there's a lot of ambiguity right now.
I'll say performance and costs are going to be dramatically improved in StarkNet. I would love to say more about what we're expecting this year, but I'm not going to spill the beans. Do go 425 to Coral Stage, and you'll hear what I mean.
I would say two things are, one, developer experience, which ultimately leads to better user experience. So Arbitrum Stylus I mentioned, I'm hopeful that hits mainnets of many Arbitrum chains this year. And I'm pretty optimistic about that. And the second one is also continuing on the security and decentralization points. So Vitalik has this sort of 3-point rubric, 0, 1, 2, where Arbitrum is leading a general purpose platform today as a layer 1, as a 1. It doesn't sound too exciting. You say we're number 1, but most are in 0, so it's pretty exciting. But I'd like to see that go from 1 to 2, and also see things like Arbitrum Bold deployed to mainnet, which opens up validation for everyone. Security again is critical, and I'm happy with where we are, but there's still ways to go.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much to the panelists, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so